Before we start sculpting the individual objects into the planar body, it's a good practice to apply the scale of all of the objects to get the most accurate brush behavior. The subdivision surface modifiers can also be applied for each object, but be careful not to apply the mirror modifiers yet. It's easier to make changes on both sides if we keep them for now, as well as the object location and rotation. Just to be thorough, you can hide the objects you already applied the modifiers for and move on to the others. This way you visually know which ones you already did. Alternatively, you can also select all objects, use Ctrl A to apply visual geometry to mesh to apply all modifiers for all objects. Afterwards, you can enter edit mode on the objects, select one side and delete it. Add the mirror modifier back for one object, select all and copy the modifier to the other objects with Ctrl L and choosing modifiers. Now we are ready to sculpt. We can start with the chest. In the previous videos, I showed you how to use dynamic topology effectively, but in the future, or perhaps already now, if you're using 2.81, there is another option, the voxel remesher. What the voxel remesher does is it remeshes the entire object based on its volume and a set detail level. It's very similar to the constant detail and manual detail option in dynamic topology. What makes it a great alternative though is that it is way faster and you have much better performance overall while sculpting by leaving dynamic topology off. There's another big benefit to it, but we'll get to that later on. Afterwards, we'll smooth the remeshed objects a bit, but you might notice that the performance is not that great right now. This is likely because we have the mirror modifier active while we sculpt. Showing modifiers in sculpt mode is pretty taxing for the performance. We could disable the modifier, but a better method is to go into the sculpt mode options in the header or sidebar and enable the option Use Deform Only. This will make sure that only the mesh that is important for sculpting is being shown to improve the performance. Also keep an eye out for X symmetry, since the point where the symmetry is being pulled from might be off. This is because most objects that we have might have the origin in the center of their mass instead of the middle point of the whole body. While sculpting, we just trim the surfaces a bit to make the chest a bit less cubic. If you look up the chest muscles online, then you'll notice that they collectively lead into the shoulder. So this is what we want to sculpt right now. For the rib cage, we can also remesh the object with the same detail level, smooth the result, and remember X symmetry. On the back, we can flatten the sphere a bit with either the scrape, flatten, or clay brushes, smooth it out, and draw in the spine. We will quickly move on to the trapezius, remesh, smooth, and use the grab or snake hook brushes to curve the muscle along the neck. Pull it really up to the back of the head and also down in between the shoulder blades. If you're stretching the geometry too much, remember to remesh the object regularly. Afterwards, we'll mark in a bit of the creases for the trapezius for the shape and direction of the muscle. We can directly move on to the neck itself. Remesh, smooth, and pull on it to give the neck a bit of curvature into the chest. Afterwards, sculpt the SCM leading into the center of the chest and below the ears with a draw or clay strips brush. In the front, we want to use the ribcage object to pronounce the bones like the collarbone. Again, use the clay strips brush or draw brush to add the collarbone, which is peeking out between the other muscles of the neck and the chest. If we look at the general area from the top, we should see the collarbone as kind of a bow shape, as in a bow and arrow. We can then adjust the nearby muscles to blend into the collarbone even more. For the shoulder blade, remesh, smooth, and scrape off the edges a bit to make it a bit more triangular. I'm saying shoulder blades, but it's more a collective mass of the bone and many overlapping muscles. From the top view, we can see a bit of the valley formed by the shoulder blades. You can isolate parts of the 3D viewport with Alt-B and drawing an area that will be shown. This is great to hide geometry that is in the way or to view cross-sections of an object. The curve of the back leads into the shoulder, which then adds its own curvature to the mix. Looking at the trapezius and collarbone, we can see a bit of a triangle shape leading into the shoulder. For the shoulder, we'll again remesh, smooth, scrape a bit, and pull it out a little bit. Afterwards, we should have these two corners to the front view. Then the bottom part can be pulled up more. Afterwards, we'll also pull the shoulder blades a bit into the shoulder itself. The center cylinder can also be remeshed, smoothed, and pulled up a bit more to fill in the armpits. Mark the spine with the draw brush and smooth it a bit. Then we'll add some volume with the clay brush for the latissimus dorsi muscle that is basically wrapping around almost the entire back. We'll also crease the waist a bit to mark the end of the rib cage. Use the draw or clay brushes to define an edge to the rib cage above the abdomen as well. The overall volumes should move a bit inwards towards the waist and outwards again below it. Make sure the latissimus dorsi has a noticeable volume going down the back. For the abdomen, again, remesh smooth and then draw in an outline of the muscles and smooth them a little bit afterwards. Even though we call it a 6-pack, in reality it's actually an 8-pack. Make sure the horizontal dividing lines between them are more S-curved than straight. Between the bottom ones, we'll add the belly button. The lowest part of the abdomen are then going down the pelvis. Also, as a side note, after recording this footage, make sure the space between the top abs and the chest muscles is very small. In my case, I pretty much without realizing it at that point, I made a 10-pack, so try to avoid that. The pelvis itself can also continue the crease of the spine down to the butt. For this example, we'll just simplify the penis to a bulge right now and move on to the hips. For the hips, we'll pull up the mesh a bit to leave a mere outline of a pelvis above it. This is similar to the collarbone being visible between the surrounding muscles. Flatten the side of the hips and scrape the surfaces around it like an almost spherical cylinder that is attached to the pelvis. Push out the lower volume of the butt. In my case, I also made the middle part of the torso a bit wider to make less of a disconnect between the chest and the pelvis. In the next video, I'll go over how to sculpt a planar version of the arms and legs.